And that's what he did. So what you see there, it gives new meaning to the term peckerhead. Now, of course, I don't propose we should intervene with this. This is not our goal. But it simply means that the necessary, if you will, the mild scorn that we need for these individuals is what we need. He said something interesting. He said, in his opinion, Cheney knows the war in Iraq is lost. Of course he knows it's lost. And then he said, I think Cheney's trying to push it into the next term. And I think in reality, he's wrong on that Cheney knows the war is lost, and he's trying to escalate the war against Iran because he thinks in the nuclear realm he'll have escalation dominance. He'll say, okay, we are conventionally defeated in Iraq, but if we go nuclear, then we can win. And the candidates. Here's another one. On the 17th, we have the answer march on the Pentagon, if anybody's coming. I think this is important. On January 27th, we had a very good intervention, also thanks to DC 9/11 Truth in particular. But what we've got to do when we go to these demonstrations, we want to make ourselves into a single mass, 9/11 Truth, right? That we're the most aggressive, the most polemical, right? The most active, the most energetic. And therefore, we need to have a gathering point. So I'm urging you, if you're going to go to Washington on the 17th to go to the Pentagon, come to the DC 9/11 Truth website. We're also having, and I know many places have this, weekly public war warning demonstrations. In Leipzig, Germany, they started having small demonstrations in the evenings. In 1988, they'd have 5, 10, 20 people that limped along for a while. Then 500, 1,000, 5,000, 20,000. By the time they got to 250,000, the communist regime of East Germany fell and was replaced. So you don't know what could happen. Now the last one, I apologize for the spelling here, but general strike anyway. We are heading now into a general breakdown crisis of world society, which, if we're lucky, will peak approximately 2020, a long slog as far as I can see. In case of a wider war or martial law, the general strike. In this, we have the dying voice of Martin Luther King. How did he end his life? Many people praise King. The King that I think is relevant to us right now is the most mature, the most intelligent, the most experienced Martin Luther King. What was his final project in life? How did he die? He was in Memphis, and there was a strike of these black garbage men. And what he was trying to do, there is no doubt, he was trying to transform that isolated strike of those few workers into a regional general strike, to force the city of Memphis to give human conditions and a living wage to the garbage men. And that is how he died. So his final word to us was a word of general strike. Let's not forget it. Now then we have, more recently in our own time, the gallant people of Spain send us a lesson. In March of 2004, NATO intelligence blew up the Madrid subways and killed 250 people. This is Aznar, the Prime Minister of Spain, Bush's friend, a neo-fascist. He comes directly from the Falangist party of Francisco Franco. He's a fascist. He tried, at that moment, to declare a state of siege, call off the election, and make himself dictator. And he was stopped by the Spanish people. Now, I guess you think that I'm living in Never Never Land, or that I've lost any mooring in reality, but I cannot reconcile myself with the idea that this can never happen in the United States. I think it can happen, it should happen. People in San Francisco can remember a general strike there in the 1930s, in Minneapolis similarly. If you remember Kent State and the invasion of Cambodia, that was in effect a general strike of college students in this country in May of 1970. It was. But here's what we had. In Spain, 28% of the population were in the streets. 11.4 million people. Look at that. 2 million in Madrid. These are the biggest demonstrations in the thousands of years of history of Spain. Pick your city. Bilbao, 300,000 people. Granada, 250,000. Cordoba, and so forth. Why not here? The only way you're going to get this is by talking about it, by keeping alive the idea that there is an ultima ratio, there is a last recourse against tyranny, which is simply shut it all down. Now, in conclusion, I offer a litmus test for tactics. There are a lot of good tactics, and I support a lot of them, but now we have to be ruthlessly realistic. What tactics can impact the situation? I submit to you, at least respectfully, as I've described it. A world strategic situation which is very far gone within the time frame. Civil disobedience. I think one 9/11 Truth activist is so valuable that it's simply a waste to get people arrested and have their lives disrupted. If you want to reach 2 or 3 million people, call into limbo. Just sit there patiently for 6 or 9 hours, call into limbo, tell lies to the screeners, get on there and do something. And a lot of people did it. Call C-SPAN, call Larry King. There's no reason to go to jail. You can reach more people. And if you really want to get arrested, you know, there are these rallies by people high up in the administration or Hillary Clinton or people like this. Maybe that's where you should go. Boycotts or indeed lifestyle reform, I think this is fine, but this is not going to be the immediate focus that we need. The other problem is people say, in terms of accountability, we want to go to the courts. The problem you have with the courts is that they're packed with fascist judges. And I had a whole historical part, which I left out now. This has always been so. From Roger Taney in the 1860s, the racist Supreme Court Chief Justice, to the 9 old men of the 1930s, the federal courts are always the last bastion of the worst oligarchs and reactionaries. So I think court cases are good. If you have Phil Berg, pro bono, you can do wonderful things. But you don't want to spend tremendous amounts of money. And again, you want to use these things as propaganda vehicles. Because here's the problem you have. You ever hear of the Federalist Society? It's a fascist organization in the spirit of Carl Schmitt, Hitler's lawyer. Their guru, Hitler's lawyer. Look at it that way. They have packed the federal judiciary. This is already bad enough, right? This is not even the current constellation. You have the fascist Scalia and the fascist Clarence Thomas. Rehnquist is now gone. Who do we have? We have the neo-fascist Roberts and Alito, sometimes known as Scalito. So after all of your fighting and all your hundreds of thousands of dollars of legal expenses, you're going to get to the Supreme Court, and you're going to find the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Scalia, Scalito, Thomas, and Roberts. The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And I don't think this can be realistic. It's like talking about impeachment in 2004. It's great propaganda. But in terms of agitation, thinking you're really going to do it, it's hard. How about this other one? People don't know about this one. This is the D.C. Circuit. This is the U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit in D.C. And they just put out this opinion saying, if you're an Arab in Guantanamo, you have no rights. That's this guy Sentel. See him? Sentel? There's also Silberman. Real dyed-in-the-wool neo-fascist reactionaries. It's like Roger Taney. Roger Taney, Dred Scott decision. He says the black man has no rights that the white man is bound to respect. These guys say the Arab has no rights that the U.S. is bound to respect. So the federal courts in general, to me, do not seem very promising. So again, I urge you, in the next couple of weeks, get moving on 9/11 truth squads. Do it. It's not easy. It takes gumption. it's stressful in many ways, right? You have to pull yourself together and formulate something and go into what is likely to be a semi-hostile environment, but it may also be wildly supportive. You don't know until you do it. But this is what is demanded of us. And again, if you could think about all those Arabs, all those Iranians, Chinese, Indians, Russians, they would like to be able to influence the U.S. government. They can't. We can, or we could. And if we can, we must. My slogan, taught to me by a Spanish leftist: get active or get radioactive. Those are your choices. Get active or get radioactive. And that is the world we have. I'm sorry for it. But get active or get radioactive. And if you want to keep in touch with the world picture, here we are, Genesis World Report, the Washington Wrap-Up every Thursday. And I commend... Right? And there we go. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Let's do it again. If there are we have questions, comments, and criticisms if you want. Unless if there's the microphone, I have to confess, when it comes to Hollywood, I'm not up to date. But we have authoritative representatives of our Los Angeles group. We have Lynn Pence here. We have Kathleen Rosenblatt. They have intimate insider knowledge of goings on in Hollywood. I would ask them. We have. You have the entire U.S. political process, right? Political parties, government bureaucracy, mass media, associations, lobbyists. It's a huge mass with tens of millions of people living off of it. And the question is, how do you change the course of that in a radical way? Under normal circumstances, the president simply does not have the power to do that. You can see examples in previous administrations. The notion that the presidency automatically has power is a fallacy. The president cannot really decree anything. Often the president's policies are ignored by the bureaucracy, sabotaged by the bureaucracy, actively opposed. So the problem for the 9/11 conspiracy, right, for the September criminals, was how do you radically change the course of the entire regime with a stunning, overt outside event? You see what I'm getting at? It's not like Bush can say, I declare war on terror. From now on, the purpose of this society is the war on terror. That would go the way of 99 other proclamations that they issue every couple of weeks. It's got to be a huge, stunning event that moves the bureaucracy, the media, the parties, the lobbyists, everything. And that's what it is. Now, if you're gonna have that, are you gonna tell Bush in advance? Bush is the least of your worries. Bush will either go along or he'll be swept away in the process. And remember, if you, again, read my book based on Hopsiker, based on journalistic accounts of the place, there is a kind of half-hearted attempt to assassinate Bush in the morning as a warning. And then you get this message, and the message comes in loaded with top-secret code words. And it is the message of the coup faction saying, Bush, this is what we want you to do. Because they've got to tell him what they want him to do. If you look at Edward Lutwak, one of the more intelligent neocons, has a book about the coup d'etat. And at one point he sort of suggests that the modern coup is not to replace one person as a ruler with a different person, but rather to change the direction and nature of a government by an outside event. And that's what 9/11 is. If you're doing that, you're not going to tell Bush in advance. You're going to tell him something, but you're certainly not going to give him a detailed overview of what you're doing. He doesn't need that, and he's too limited. If you look at the first 6 months or 8 months of the Bush administration, it's catatonia, the endless summer, the long vacation. In particular, I write about in my book, when the U.S. spy plane collided with a Chinese fighter and had to land in China, The neocons went wild. They said, at last, we got rid of Clinton. Clinton was not to our liking. Now we have a president who can really be a warmonger. We have the grounds of a confrontation with China. The way they do it is this. They say to China, give back that plane in 6 hours. And if you don't, we're going to go to nuclear alert. And we're going to force you to back down. And we're going to humiliate you, and you'll lose face. This is what the neocons wanted. They wanted to use the fact that the Chinese had the plane to get them into a monkey trap, given the idea that the Chinese might be psychologically susceptible to that. And what did Bush do? As I write in my book, he did absolutely nothing. He got his bike, and he got his running, and he got his 8 to 10 hours of sleep, and he came back from Camp David because it was raining, and he couldn't do his recreation program. And the neocons went nuts. They said, after 8 years when we couldn't get everything we wanted, we've got our own puppet in there, and he doesn't do anything. And you see the problem. It's part of it is Bush's mentality. As I wrote in my earlier book on the previous Bush, the model of a Bush presidency is a weak, passive president who sits in the White House and waits for his handlers to tell him what he must do. So that's what he did. And of course, he's got cocaine, he's got megalomania, he's got alcohol history, and so on down the line. So that is why. And you're not going to tell him in advance. You're going to tell Cheney a little bit more, but you're not going to tell Cheney the whole story either. And of course, the notion that Cheney is this Bengali who ran everything on one phone with his wife yapping in his ear is fantastic. And they're going to say, we're going to spend $500 million to $1 billion and bet the entire political future of the neocon faction on a guy who's had 4 heart attacks and 3 pacemakers. Maybe he gets too excited in the middle of the coup and drops dead. And then where are we? It's impossible. It had to be a private command center in a private military firm. And we might have mentioned one a little while ago, did we? No, I can't go any further. Oh, great. Where are you from?
Germany.
Wonderful.
Great material, great ideas, and great analysis.
It's only one way that Roosevelt is attacked. The problem, the reason that Europe looked the way it did after World War II, primarily 2 things mainly connected to the British. The first is that the British aristocracy supported Hitler hook, line, and sinker. Hitler is unthinkable without Lord Montague Norman of the Bank of England, without Lady Astor, Lord Astor, Lord Astor, Lord Brand, Lord Lothian, Lord Halifax, so-called Clifton set. Somebody here has a copy of Carroll Quigley's book on the Anglo-American establishment. The social group behind Lord Neville Chamberlain were pro-Hitler. They regarded Hitler as a one-way gun. Hitler fires east against Stalin. Of course, Hitler proved to be more rich in possibilities than they thought, didn't he? He went in all directions. So this prepares the fact that under the British appeasement, France is encircled, Spain goes fascist, Italy invades Ethiopia, Belgium drops out of the defensive network, and above all, France is encircled with hostile states and hostile navies. So France becomes indefensible as a result of the appeasement policy. If the British had had an open and honest alliance with France, Hitler would never have gotten where he did. But the British did this. Then once the war gets going, the obvious thing is have a cross-channel invasion as soon as possible. Who says no? The British. They say, oh no, we're going to go to North Africa, and then we're going to go to the Balkans, and Churchill wanted to go to Greece. He said, we have the soft underbelly. These are all ways that Churchill is trying to bleed the Soviets and the Germans white. Churchill wants the war to go on and on and on and on and on until every German and every Russian is dead. So by the time you get to 1945, the Soviet Red Army has come quite far west, right? But you can't blame this on Roosevelt. Blame it on Churchill. But they're wrong. It makes no sense. The British ruling class are the ones who did it. And I will add, I have to also add, since we're on Roosevelt, in order to understand this, there is generally in the 9/11 truth movement a notion that somehow Roosevelt is responsible for Pearl Harbor. I've studied this problem during the winter interval, and I found that that is also an absurdity. That it is. That this is a slander spread by pro-fascist Roosevelt haters, the ruling class of the United States who hated Roosevelt. Roosevelt checkmated the banking interests.
Absolutely correct.
And essentially you had in the Navy, the officer class of the U.S. Navy were Roosevelt haters and pro-British and therefore pro-fascist. And there's a very complicated story to be told about this, but the story that Roosevelt withheld intelligence dispatches from Pearl Harbor, this is not the case. What happened is that the Navy admirals, these Anglophile pro-fascist admirals, withheld the intelligence dispatches from Roosevelt and from the commanders in Hawaii. So in this case, if you want to know one person who's responsible for Pearl Harbor, it's Churchill once again. Churchill is responsible for Pearl Harbor because you have two systems of Japanese code. You have the purple diplomatic code that the U.S. could read, and the JN-25 military, the naval code of the Japanese. And wait, that the U.S. could read purple, and the British could read JN-25. So the British knew the movements of Japanese battleships. The U.S. did not, and the evidence is that Churchill withheld that. And there's a famous quote from Churchill. His drunken son Randolph says, "Hey Winnie, what are you going to do now in the fall of France?" He says, "I shall drag the Americans in," and he did. So what you have to remember is the infinite malice of Churchill. And blaming these things on Roosevelt, this we leave to this clique. It's a coterie around the American Liberty League, Hamilton Fish. It's a bunch of reactionary Republicans who are just using anything to pin this stuff on Roosevelt. Huh? It's a ridiculous account. It's ridiculous. I've studied it very carefully. He says that somehow Admiral Kimmel is not able to conduct reconnaissance north of Pearl Harbor. Why not? He can't show an order saying Kimmel is not allowed to send some light cruisers north of Pearl Harbor. He never gets to the point of this. But anyway, there's also the notion, you think that Roosevelt tells Stimson what to do? You think Roosevelt tells General Marshall what to do? That's the other question on the Army side. I've shown you, Stimson is the invisible government. Roosevelt is not. Roosevelt is president of the United States. He's not the invisible government. But he's got, in order to wage the war, he's got to bring these interests into the government so they don't sabotage him. Senator Sarbanes. Senator Sarbanes of Maryland is with us tonight.
I have two issues. Number one is regarding we need a good DVD to educate the bush crowd. And I'd like to know your best two you recommend, because number one, no question of mine, the best I've ever seen is Sophia's 9/11 mysteries, because she doesn't attack the Bush administration. She just shows the mysteries and she asks people to draw their own conclusions. Do you know of another one?
I'm sure there are many. I mean, again, film criticism is not my forte.
Okay.
I have to yield. I would defer to the judgment of other people who know the existing DVD literature better than I do.
Number two is, since you're obviously a big supporter of President Roosevelt, which surprised me.
I'm a supporter of historical truth against reactionary Republican slander. Essentially, generalizations. They're essentially mythological statements. I've done my homework. It's these people who don't look empirically at what goes on from day to day. What do you see? Who dominated the world for 300 years? I think it was called the British Empire. Am I right? Yes. When you look today, what do you see? Bush together with Blair, together with Olmert, I suppose. And that's what acts. So you have to confront all of these generalizations with this. The Illuminati thesis seems to me to be something that leads absolutely nowhere. And the notion There are the people in this room, if you're in the middle class now, you have got to realize that without the New Deal, you probably would not be in the middle class. There would not be a middle class. The other one is, if you didn't have the New Deal, a lot of people might have said, let's see what Hitler has to offer. Maybe Hitler is better than Herbert Hoover. So it's a very large historical question, but I would say to you, the reason I'm insisting on this, why is it? We now have to look ahead to political activity. Let's think about economics. What kind of economics do we need? Do we need Malthusian economics, the way Al Gore and Prince Charles would like? Do we need libertarian economics with Milton Friedman? I say no. We need New Deal economics. Economic populism based on New Deal economic approaches is what we need. And if you look at Bowman, look at Bowman's campaign website. If you look at what Bowman ran on and got 44%, he's talking New Deal economics, generally speaking, with some differences, but of course there have to be differences because not everything in the New Deal was good, and we're living in a different world, so there have to be profound changes.
I'd like to bring this back to, excuse me, what most of us came in for, and that's the political activism.
That we want to draw on all the resources so we don't duplicate everything. DC 9/11 Truth can be one clearinghouse, 9/11 Blogger obviously another one. If you want to find out what candidate is coming to you, I believe that after Downing Street has got candidate tracking going on, there's also a Quaker website that deals with what they call bird dogging, which is to confront candidates on issues. Now, I don't like the term bird dogging because it lacks that ineffable dignity that belongs to everything that we do. But you can call it bird dogging if you want to. You can go there and find out what they've said about different issues, but unfortunately probably not 9/11. If you want to speak, you got to get the microphone. That's wonderful. Let me just add this. If you listen to these political commentators, like they say, Hillary Clinton says, let's chat. Let's have a dialogue. Let the conversation begin. We say, yes, Mrs. Clinton, why are you a warmonger? Iran, the new 9/11, Cheney, the Zbigniew Brzezinski, and on and on and on. Then she says, you know, in the Democratic Party, we have such a talented field. We have a collection of the best candidates ever. I think the average person says, I'm going to vomit. When I look at this collection of mediocrities, criminals, I'm going to vomit. In other words, what I tried to express before is the notion that in the population, there's a disgust, a loathing, a rage against this ruling class. Their ego, their presumption, their arrogance, their incompetence. You can get away with arrogance if you produce, but they don't. And somehow, all of this is waiting to explode, and I think we can make it happen in the way that was said, and I thank the speaker. I would say we are against terrorism. We are anti-terrorists. We don't like terrorism because terrorism is the way the finance oligarchy wages war on the people. So we're against it. Huh?
I'd just like to remind people that Webster will be on that. I don't understand that relationship.
Israel is a creation of the British oligarchy. The idea of Israel was born in the mind of Lord Palmerston, the British Foreign Secretary, in the 1830s. It did not occur to Lord Rothschild that he would go there. He didn't want to go. There's a famous quote where Palmerston says, hey, Rothschild, we're going to send you to Palestine. And he says, I want a seat in the House of Lords, not under a bloody palm tree in Jerusalem. So in other words, the common notion of the power relations is completely upside down. Israel is a product of the British Empire and British world domination, the Balfour Declaration and all the rest of it, over 100 years or more. So there's a factional cohesion. There's also the fact that Bush the Elder is in many ways the founder of the current neocon faction in the form of Team B. Again, you read about this in my book.
Yeah, I remember a comment. It's regarding, let's see, how do you think, does Bush really care if the country seems to close? Do you think he's really concerned about our nation, whether it exists anymore, or is it, he's, like Putin thinks, he talks bad about America, and, it's like,
Again, Putin, I think, again, I want to stress Putin. Putin is the most intelligent head of state in the world right now. His competition was Mahathir Mohamad of Malaysia, who is no longer in office. But these are the most intelligent people at the head of a country. Bush, on the other hand, is a mental wreck. In other words, to say, does Bush take the future welfare of the United States seriously? He can't. He can't see through the clouds of megalomania, brain damage from cocaine, alcoholism, the pretzel.
But does Putin really care what Russia says that works? You know what I'm saying? Is that this is the one world system?
Yeah, look, I think this again is a fallacy. Look, I'm afraid, especially in right-wing circles, you have the notion they're all bad. Russia, China, and Bush are the same thing. This is simply absurd. If you work with intelligence from day to day, you see that this is wrong. This is not the reality of the world. That there are, you can say, there are greater and lesser evils.
So you're saying Putin's better?
That Putin is better than Bush because Putin has put out a realistic, fact-based war warning to say the world must wake up to the fact that we're drifting towards World War III. And Bush is obviously a part of the forces pushing towards the drift. You can call it a game, but it's also the survival of great. This is a very facile way to put it. It is the survival of great nations. What Putin is saying is the Russian people, undefeated, never defeated in war, will not accept to be crushed in the way that Iraq has been crushed. We will not accept it. So regulate yourself accordingly.
You're talking Soviet Russia? Or you're talking
Russia, what you see today, Russia, the eternal Russia that's been there for 1,500 years. Yeah, Russia with a capital R. And this, the right-wing notion, I see the right-wing, they say, well, again, I tried to make fun of this, right? Putin, the Ruskies, the foreigners. This blinds you to the fact that there are lights and shadows in the contemporary world. That basically, Schroeder.
You don't divide Soviet Russia from Russia.
Well, no, it's obviously quite different. It's very different.
You got to remember Reagan saying, "Oh, the evil wicked, has fallen, and the wall has gone." So
the basic Russian argument is to say we have exited the totalitarian system. Communism has been swept aside, and we still see the relentless march of aggression. The thing that Putin complains about in the speech, he says, why are you putting ABM missiles in Czech Republic and Poland? He says, this is a hostile act. Don't do it. A couple of days later, the head of the strategic rocket troops came out and said, if you put missiles in Poland and Czechoslovakia, we will have to target them with missiles of our own. And they're threatening to break out of the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty and the Conventional Forces Treaty. It is a huge strategic crisis caused by the neocons. The neocons are the ones responsible.
All right, thank you.
So the neocons are the absolute nadir. They're the absolute worst in the world. I mean, isn't this clear? July and August, when it was a question of getting people to watch that C-SPAN thing and calling into the radio shows, the blogger became the central point where everybody could report and be encouraged, and people were writing, why didn't we do this before? Let's never stop doing this. Remember these comments? Let's never stop doing this.
Webster, two questions back, the gentleman asked if he thought Bush has America's interest at heart. That kind of leads with something I've been wondering about. Is there an action going on to take down the United States?
Irrelevant point, and thank you for bringing it up. I mentioned the London Economist, the issue of, February 3rd or February 4th, where they essentially say, don't look now, but the British Empire is back. London has again passed New York as the main center of international finance. New York has gone down because of Sarbanes-Oxley. We had Sarbanes here before. Senator Sarbanes still with us? No, I guess he didn't like it. But Sarbanes-Oxley has made it harder to have speculative actions in New York that you can now have in London. So the London Economist seems to be saying the U.S. is now collapsing so fast that the British Empire can make a comeback. Within that framework, the neocons can be seen as a bunch of again, I call them one-trick ponies. If you put a neocon into a situation, the answer is always one thing: war. There are only military solutions. Doesn't matter what it is. You say, should we have the full funding of Head Start and WIC? War! The global war on terror. There's nothing else to it. So you could say whoever gave preponderant power to the neocons were sure to destroy the U.S. There's a lot to it. Did people see this movie V for Vendetta? All right. Now, I object to the movie because it doesn't show Guy Fawkes as a patsy, because he was a patsy. He was a patsy for Lord Cecil. But we leave this aside. If you look at the picture in V for Vendetta, Britain is in bad shape, but the U.S. is in much worse shape. The U.S. has famine, civil war, social breakdown, and I think that seems to be a scenario that appeals to the British. Have the British ever given up on being an empire? No. Have the British ever given up on world domination? No. I talked before, the infinite malice of Winston Churchill. Gallipoli. I remember Gallipoli because one of my relatives was killed in the British Army at Gallipoli. Sir Winston Churchill set the pound too high, created the Great Depression of the 1930s. His machinations in the Second World War. Again, I say Pearl Harbor goes on his account, not Roosevelt's. Look at this infinite malice of the British. Is it still alive? It's evidently still alive. Prince Charles runs Gore. If Gore gets the presidency, watch out. Gore would take down the United States into all-out chaos. There's a reason to believe that a Gore presidency would make Bush look like a picnic. So I think there's something to be said for this. In other words, the rapid decline of the U.S. is not simply a chance phenomenon or a combination of unplanned factors, but there may be a design behind it. And if there is such a design, the only location for such a design is London, because it's the only place that can think in these terms and have the ability to do it, right? Russia couldn't do that, Germany, France, China, Japan. Nobody else could do it.
Yeah, well, where do you see
Come to the mic.
Where do you see the thinking, first of all, for
The American Union becomes interesting, doesn't it, as a means of submerging the U.S. in some kind of a continental block of poverty and free trade and globalization. About 20 years ago, I had looked at it in the following way. I thought if the British provoked the secession of Quebec from Canada, that secession would become the method. In other words, break up everything. There's this scenario book, The 7 Nations of North America, if you've ever seen that. There are all kinds of secessionist ideas. Ultimately, the notion of breaking up Canada and the U.S. appeals to the British mind for obvious reasons. But it may now be that the field has been reversed, and that the notion, of course, is to impose free trade and globalization with no possibility of protectionism. And I guess in economics, I would be a mild protectionist, again, with the New Deal. Yes.
Fascinating talk. Brzezinski, if I recall correctly, I read a book when I was in college, a high school, about the 70s and Brzezinski's role in putting together the trilateral coalition. And I'm just starting to read 9/11, your book, and I read the Versailles piece that you wrote, which I found very, very good and on point. But this focus on the British Empire versus the Rockefellers and big oil and Wall Street, Goldman Sachs, and the Rothschild financiers, is one that I'd like you to expand on. The way I see the world sort of developing, you've got these 3 trading blocks, Oceania, Eurasia, East Asia, the trilateral vision of the world. Bush just announced.
But wait. It's not quite the trilateral vision of the world anymore.
Bush just announced a couple of weeks ago this idea of a Canadian, Mexican, North American single currency unit. And it just seems like everything that's starting to happen and unfold is in keeping with this tripartite vision of the world. Could you comment on that?
Again, remember, the Trilateral Commission was Western Europe, the United States, and Japan under Anglo-American world domination, on the dollar system, NATO, US-based alliances. In other words, the Trilateral Commission was an expression of an Anglo-American world empire. Okay? Now, given the obvious attrition of the US side, it's now Shanghai Cooperation Organization, Russia, China, Iran, Pakistan, maybe, India, maybe under certain circumstances, although harder. Japan still completely puppet state of the US, I would say. So it's different. Concerning the dollar, unfortunately, because of the time limitations, I couldn't go into the death agony of the dollar. And it's unfortunate that I couldn't, because if you want to know what's the motor force of this, it's the collapse of the dollar, the death agony of the US dollar. Now, about a year ago, there was this question about the yen carry trade. People familiar with these things? Do you follow the economic intelligence? There's been this thing where Japan has been the liquidity pump of the world. 0% loans, free money. So if you're a speculator and a banker, you can borrow in Japan for 0, and you can go to Turkey and collect 20%. And this creates a huge speculative structure, except as soon as there's a panic, the rush for the exits. Last year around this time, Iceland blew. Other countries were about to blow, Turkey, emerging markets. Now, the Japanese have raised their interest rate a second time. It's gone from 0.25% to 0.5% just this past week. The dollar is very, very shaky. People may have seen a column by Paul Samuelson, the economist, in the past week, saying that the global bazaar is in trouble. There's a cold wind blowing in the global bazaar. The notion is now the derivatives market of the world has reached $500 trillion. $500 trillion. This is about 5 or 6 times what the entire world is worth. In other words, the cost of the world is less than 100 trillion as far as I can see. So there's a $500 trillion derivatives market, which is held by hedge funds, and Soros, people like this, although he's not the leading edge anymore. So now there's a question. Do you remember long-term capital management in 1998? When long-term capital management blew as a result of the Russian state bankruptcy, it blew a hole of about $10 billion in the world banking system, and Greenspan rushed in with a wall of money to plug it. And now we're back to that. And people are talking about something called the Great Unwind. The Great Unwinding. And unwinding is what happens if a hedge fund goes bankrupt and they've got to sort out all of these crazy derivatives transactions. That's known as the unwinding. So the notion is now that the whole dollar system is about to blow. And this may indeed be now the British plan to say, and again, this is the history of it is essentially this, to make it really simple. The current form of domination here, the invisible government, is a result of Grover Cleveland turning control over the U.S. public debt to J.P. Morgan in 1895. So J.P. Morgan rules the roost. The faction then becomes Morgan, Mellon, Rockefeller, I suppose, later on, but Rockefellers are dummies. They don't count a whole lot, I don't think. Soon after 1895, you have what? The blowing up of the Maine, the Spanish-American War, the founding of the empire, all done through provocation. The assassination of McKinley, again, to get the lunatic Theodore Roosevelt. So you get the presidents who are really sold, who are really dyed-in-the-wool puppets of the invisible government. Theodore Roosevelt, Woodrow Wilson. They bring us the FBI, the Federal Reserve System, the income tax system. This entire thing comes, the whole current structure comes under Theodore Roosevelt, Woodrow Wilson. Both are puppets of Morgan, Morgan, Morgan. We get into World War I for no reason, because Morgan has to bail out the British, because otherwise he'll go bankrupt too. He's the agent of the British. That's the other thing. Morgan is the designated representative of London in New York. So that's what you've been ruled by. You've been ruled by a transatlantic combine where the U.S. was the junior partner and apparently became the senior partner sometime between 1914 and 1945. But the British role in making the strategy has always been the leading one. I showed you the Bernard Lewis plan. The whole strategy for the Middle East, for the U.S., Britain, and Israel, comes from Bernard Lewis, who is a British member of the British Arab Bureau. So he's an MI6 agent. And when he had his birthday, Bernard Lewis's birthday was recent, he had Cheney come to it and Kissinger came to show the regard that they have for Bernard Lewis. He is the leading Arabist of the Western world. And his strategy is carve. He could be called Lord Carver. He wants to cut up every Arab and Islamic state. He loves Arab states so much he wants to make 100 more of them. And that's what they do. So the British have always provided the strategy. Harold Macmillan wrote, he was the Prime Minister of Britain, he said, they're the Romans and they have the empire, the US, but we'll be the Greeks of the empire. In other words, we provide the ideas. And then there's the famous rhyme about the creation of the International Monetary Fund. In Washington, Lord Halifax remarked once to Lord Keynes, it's true that they have all the bombs, but we have all the brains. So the British are the mind of the dumb giant. But now they seem to be telling the dumb giant, kill yourself, dumb giant. And the dumb giant is responding. That sort of, again, I wish I had time to go through the history of the invisible government, because here you can see how crazy it is to say Bush did this. This has been there for 110, 115 years, way before Bush. And the Bushes in this constellation are small beer, small change. They're not the big ones. Morgan is big. Mellon was fairly big at the time. Rockefeller, well, semi-big. Any other questions? About the slide.